I was standing in my garden, barefoot, sweat rolling down my neck, when I heard it. A muffled scream. Not from the woods, not from the road, but from underneath my land. I froze. My rake clattered to the ground. I leaned down and pressed my ear to the soil. Another scream echoed, fainter this time. I jerked back and instinctively grabbed my flashlight. My hands trembled as I pulled back the old slab of plywood that the HOA insisted I never remove. It covered a strange dip in the soil that I'd always assumed was from water damage. That was when I found it. A tunnel. Dug neatly. Reinforced. Hidden. There were footprints, flashlights mounted to the dirt walls, and half-eaten protein bars tossed carelessly by the edge. And there, carved into the dirt with red chalk, my name. That's when someone behind me whispered, "You weren't supposed to see this." I spun around and saw Karen, smiling. Let me take you back a few weeks before that terrifying moment. My name's Jason Miller, 38 years old, ex-firefighter turned small business owner. I inherited my late uncle's ranch-style home in a quiet Arizona suburb. Big yard. Red soil. Miles of peace. The only problem? The HOA. Or as I started calling them, the council. Now, most HOAs deal with paint colors, grass length, and garbage bins. But this one? It felt more like a secret society. There was Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. Blonde, stiff posture, always in a red suit like she was running for Congress. Her inner circle included Rick, a smug ex-lawyer with a suspicious eye twitch, and Deborah, the local gossip who knew everyone's medical history. They started coming after me the moment I moved in. First, they fined me for unapproved mulch color. Then, they tried to block my garden project because it was too close to the sacred boundary line. Sacred? That was when I got suspicious. So I started digging, not literally at first. I researched property maps, public permits, anything strange. I found mentions of restricted terrain around my backyard, land that was technically mine but was always under review by the HOA. I wrote letters. I got no answers. Instead, they started sending anonymous warnings in my mailbox. Let things be. This place has rules for a reason. I installed cameras around my house. Some of them were ripped down the next morning. That's when I decided to dig, literally. It began with a shovel and some gut instinct. The ground in one part of my garden always felt hollow. My dog Max, a golden retriever with a nose for mischief, kept barking at the same spot near my old shed. I started turning over the soil one morning. A foot down I hit plywood. Nailed down, camouflaged. I almost left it alone, but then I heard a vibration. Not a noise exactly. More like something moving underneath. I thought it was an animal nest. But I kept digging. I didn't expect a tunnel. And I definitely didn't expect to hear a scream. Life before that moment had been peaceful, at least on the surface. My neighbors seemed polite enough. But I noticed they avoided Karen. No one really made eye contact when she was around. HOA meetings were more like rituals, stiff, scripted, no questions allowed. I once asked during a meeting, "Why is that side of my yard considered restricted?" Karen gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "We protect our community's foundations, Jason." Foundations. Like concrete? Deborah coughed and moved the meeting forward. I let it go, for a time. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized, nobody in the neighborhood had ever seen what was under their yards. And they were too afraid to ask. Then came the night my power cut out for no reason. My garden lights flickered. My cameras were disabled. The next morning, a note was nailed to my door. Just one word. Stop. I didn't stop. I bought better cameras. Hidden ones this time. That's when I caught them. 3 a.m., 3 figures dressed in black, crawling out of my garden. One held a flashlight. One had a duffel bag. They disappeared into the shadows. But one of them had Karen's silver heels dangling from her hand. That was the final push. I spent the next day digging furiously. I found the plywood again. This time I forced it open. The air smelled damp, like something ancient had been hiding. I pointed my flashlight into the tunnel and saw boots. Muddy. Worn. Lined up like people had walked this path 100 times. On the wall, crude drawings. Some marked with arrows. Some with names. Mine included. And then the scream. Jason. I turned sharply. That voice wasn't in the tunnel. It was behind me. I spun around, and there stood Karen. But she wasn't alone. Behind her were Rick and Deborah. All three held something in their hands. Karen with a taser, Rick with what looked like a stun baton, and Deborah? A clipboard. "We asked you nicely," Karen said, her eyes glinting. "But now you've seen too much." I backed up toward the hole. That's when Karen took a step forward and whispered, "We built this community on secrets, and no one escapes the tunnel." I didn't move. Karen was inching closer, the stun gun in her hand humming softly. Rick cracked his baton against his palm, grinning like this was all just some sick game. Deborah didn't blink. She just kept writing something down on that clipboard, like she was already documenting my accident. I had 3 options: fight, run, or jump. And honestly, the tunnel behind me suddenly seemed like the safest place to be. So I turned and jumped in. I landed hard. My flashlight cracked against the packed dirt, but it still worked. Above me, I heard Karen scream, "Get him!" Their footsteps pounded above as I crawled forward, through the narrow tunnel I barely fit into. The walls were tight, the ceiling low. But what chilled me the most weren't the echoes behind me. It was the whispers ahead. I wasn't alone down there. The tunnel twisted left and right like it had no end. The dirt was damp, but there were lights nailed into the walls, actual battery-operated lanterns guiding the way. This wasn't a random hole. This was engineered. I kept crawling until I reached a wider space. The tunnel opened up into what looked like a storage bunker. Wooden beams held the ceiling. Crates were stacked against the wall, and a table stood at the center. And what was on that table? Files. Photographs. Names. Maps. They had folders on every resident, including me. Inside my folder were printouts of my emails, old social media posts, HOA complaints I'd made years ago, and even medical information. I felt sick. But one file caught my eye: Emily Grant. Her file was empty, except for a note scribbled in red ink. Unstable. Too much talk. Watch closely. A rustling noise echoed behind me. I snatched up her file, stuffed it in my bag, and bolted down the next tunnel shaft. But I didn't get far, because the floor gave out. I dropped into darkness, splashing into cold, muddy water. My flashlight flew from my hand. And then I saw it. A face just inches away, floating in the water. Eyes open. Mouth agape. It was real. I scrambled to my feet. The figure wasn't moving. It was a mannequin. Or maybe a training dummy. But it was dressed like a mailman. A real uniform, soaked and torn. What the hell was this place? Suddenly I heard footsteps above. Fast, heavy. Then a voice. "Leave him. If he doesn't make it out, the earth will swallow him like the others." Karen. She was up there, laughing. I pulled myself onto the ledge of the chamber and looked around. The water drained out slowly through small holes in the wall. I could now see the metal hooks bolted into the concrete, stained with rust, and something darker. In the far corner was a steel cabinet, barely hanging on its hinges. I limped over to it and pulled it open. Inside, folders. Again. But these ones were different. Labeled Confidential and Archive. One was titled Operation Whisper Fence. Another, Community Correction Protocols, Phase 1. But the third made my heart drop. Subject, Emily Grant. I opened it. Inside were photos of Emily, taken without her knowledge. Some from her backyard, some from inside her house. Notes tracked what time she left home, what she ate, even when she cried. I couldn't believe it. They weren't just watching her. They were targeting her. And if they were doing this to her, what about the others? How many people had Karen and the HOA cabals already handled? I stuffed the files into my soaked backpack and followed a narrow tunnel leading out of the chamber. The air smelled like mold and iron. My flashlight, now flickering, barely lit the path. But I kept moving forward. Suddenly, I heard voices ahead. Not whispers, chanting. Soft, repetitive, in sync. I crept closer and peeked through a wooden slat at the end of the tunnel. What I saw chilled my bones. Karen, Rick, Deborah, and at least 8 others in black robes, standing in a circle inside a massive underground room. In the center was a stone table. On it, a map of the neighborhood, with houses marked in red. Mine and Emily's were circled in black. Karen stepped forward. "Jason is in the system now," she said coldly. "If he escapes, we activate Phase 2. Someone else, an older man I'd never seen before, replied. "Then we use the decoy. No one escapes the tunnel. No one." The group chanted, "Harmony through silence. Harmony through silence." I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. But I must have stepped on something. Crack. Wood snapped beneath me. The chanting stopped. Footsteps raced toward the tunnel entrance. I turned and bolted back the way I came, heart hammering in my chest. I heard Karen's voice echoing behind me. "Don't let him reach the surface." They were coming. Fast. As I stumbled back through the narrower shaft, a hand suddenly reached down from an overhead grate. "Jason." It was Emily. She had found the other end of the tunnel, under the old garden shed near the west perimeter. "I figured you'd go digging," she whispered. "You're lucky I followed you." She helped pull me out just as Rick's voice echoed from below. "Run!" Emily shouted. We sprinted together toward the edge of the ranch, where her car was parked with the engine running. "How did you know where I was?" I gasped as we slammed the doors shut. "I used to be one of them," she whispered. "But when I tried to get out, they made me disappear." Before I could even ask what she meant, headlights blinded us from behind. 3 black SUVs blocked the road. Karen stepped out of the first one, smiling, holding a match. And behind her, my ranch was on fire. The flames roared from the garden shed, licking up the dry grass and racing toward my house like a hungry beast. Smoke curled into the air, thick and black, casting shadows across the road. Karen stood in front of her black SUV with a twisted smile on her face, like it was just another Tuesday evening HOA violation. Behind her, Rick lit another match and tossed it into the brush, laughing. Emily screamed, "They're burning the evidence." I grabbed her hand, pulled her into the driver's seat, and slammed on the gas, just as the first SUV lurched forward to block us. And then I saw it. Deborah was standing on my front porch, with Max, my dog, held by the collar. We spun the wheel hard, fishtailing off the main road and cutting across my neighbor's empty lot. The smoke followed us like a trail of guilt. I gripped the wheel, trying to keep it steady, while Emily pointed toward the woods at the edge of Harmony Valley. "Go there. The old hiking trail, nobody uses it anymore. It leads to the back side of development." We crashed through bushes, tore over a patch of wildflowers, and disappeared into the trees. Only when we were deep enough in that the engines behind us faded did I finally stop. I turned to Emily. "They had Max. They knew we'd come back." She nodded slowly. "They're not just trying to scare you. They're trying to erase you." "But why?" I asked. "Why me? Why now?" Emily took a long breath. "Because you found the original entrance. The one even the new cabal members don't know about anymore." I blinked. "There's another tunnel?" She reached into her jacket and handed me a crumpled photo. It was old, faded. It showed men in hard hats digging beneath a hill. On the back, written in red ink, 1953, Harmony Valley Civil Shelter Construction Project. Emily finally told me everything. Before Harmony Valley became this model suburban dream, it was the site of a Cold War government experiment, she said. They built bunkers, tunnels, surveillance chambers, disguised it as suburban infrastructure. And the HOA? They're descendants of the original overseers. At first it was about safety. But when the funding stopped, they kept going. They became obsessed with control. Harmony through obedience. Harmony through secrecy. I stared at the photo again. "So the whole neighborhood is built on top of a government bunker?" She nodded. "And they use it to spy on people?" "Not just to spy," she whispered. "They correct people." We hid for hours in an abandoned shed at the edge of the woods. By nightfall, Emily said the only way to stop them was to find the forgotten room. A control center buried deep beneath the first tunnel I discovered. It was shut off in the 70s. But my father was one of the last engineers who worked on it. He told me it holds backup records, videos, maps, everything they're trying to erase. "Where is it?" I asked. Her voice was quiet. "Under the fountain in the HOA park." I blinked. "You mean the decorative birdbath Karen makes us clean twice a week?" Emily nodded. "It's a disguised elevator hatch. You'll need a code to unlock it." "And you know it?" She pulled out a locket from her neck. Inside was a tiny paper with 6 digits, 195,374. My dad's birth year and the date the tunnels were sealed. We snuck back into Harmony Valley just after midnight. The streets were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Lights were out. No dogs barked. Not even the crickets chirped. It felt like the neighborhood was holding its breath. We reached the park, crouching behind the hedge surrounding the bird bath. I unscrewed the panel at its base and typed in the code. Click. The ground beneath us hissed open. A circular steel platform slowly descended into the earth, swallowing us into darkness. And just as the hatch sealed, sirens wailed above. Flashlights cut through the air. We were spotted. The elevator stopped deep below. A narrow hallway stretched before us, lined with rusted lockers and thick electrical wires. We followed it for what felt like forever, until we reached a room with thick glass doors and faded government logos. I pushed the door open. Inside were dozens of monitors. Some still worked, and on those screens, recordings of nearly every home in Harmony Valley. Even my bedroom. My bathroom. I dropped to my knees. They've been watching everyone. Emily scanned the system. There's an emergency broadcast option. I can override the HOA server. We can show this to the entire county. I stood, heart racing. Let's do it. But just as she started the upload, the power cut out. The screens went black. Then, slowly, one flickered back on. It showed a live feed of Karen, standing in my backyard, holding Max, smiling, and whispering into the camera. Let's see what Jason does when we take everything. Emily gasped. Jason. She activated phase 2. The screen glitched. Then it showed Max, my golden retriever, tied to the same plywood slab I had first uncovered. Next to him was a sign in thick red letters. One more step and he disappears like the others. Karen's voice crackled through the speakers. Jason, Jason, Jason. This could have all been so simple. Emily and I stared at the screen. Max let out a soft whimper. And then, Karen looked into the camera and whispered, the whole neighborhood thinks you're dead. Don't make them right. Emily slammed the console. The emergency power sparked. The backup systems buzzed to life. And I made a decision. We were broadcasting. Tonight. We didn't have much time. The moment we turned on the override system, every alarm in the tunnel began to wail. The steel doors slammed behind us. Red warning lights flashed. Emily turned to me. If we do this, there's no going back. They started this, I said. We end it. I grabbed the emergency mic on the wall and tapped into the local HOA security line. Emily triggered the override and typed in a set of coordinates connected to the local cable feed and social network routers. Her father had built a failsafe for whistleblowers, she just never thought she'd use it. I took a deep breath. People of Harmony Valley, this is Jason Miller, Lot 247B. I know what the HOA has been hiding. It started small. One screen lit up in the monitoring room. Then 2. Then 30. We could see inside everyone's homes, and their TVs, laptops, and phones were suddenly hijacked with our broadcast. Every resident in the valley watched, confused, as my face filled their screen. This isn't just about garden beds and mailbox colors, I said. This is about control, spying, fear. I showed them the footage, Karen in her robe, leading late-night meetings underground. Rick documents people's routines. Deborah handed out files labeled violation, that were never public. Then I dropped the biggest bomb. I showed Emily's file. The surveillance. The notes. The threats. This is what they do to people who ask questions, I said. They burn their homes. They take their dogs. They rewrite our lives. Phones rang across the neighborhood. Lights turned on. Cars pulled out of driveways. For the first time in Harmony Valley history, people stepped outside and looked at each other. They weren't enemies anymore. They were witnesses. Emily whispered, it's working. But then, the broadcast screens turned red. Karen's voice broke through. You think you're the first rebel? Cute. But you just made yourself the next missing person file. Suddenly the room filled with smoke. A knockout gas. They had found us. I couldn't breathe. My limbs went heavy. Emily collapsed beside me, coughing. Then I saw them, Rick and 2 others in hazmat suits. They stormed in with tasers and black bags. Rick smiled. Thanks for showing everyone our secrets, Jason. Now they'll never find you. I lunged at him, barely standing. My hand landed on the backup drive Emily had slipped me earlier. I shoved it into my boot. Then everything went dark. I woke up to the sound of humming. Bright white light. Strapped to a chair in what looked like a converted garage, bare walls, flickering bulb, a camera watching me. Emily was gone. But in the corner of the room was someone unexpected. Mr. Howard. The old man from Lot 5A. The retired janitor. Everyone thought he was harmless. But now he wore a badge. HOA elite member. I told them we shouldn't have brought civilians in, he muttered. Then he walked over to me and whispered, I'm going to unlock your left wrist in 10 seconds. When I scream he's loose, break the window to your right. Got it? I blinked. Why are you helping me? Because my granddaughter was the first one they took. He kept his word. I was free in 10 seconds. The scream? Convincing. The chaos? Beautiful. I threw myself through the glass and rolled out onto the driveway. Rick shouted behind me, get him. But I was already in the neighbor's tool shed, hot wiring their ATV. I drove straight through fences, tearing through the HOA compound's backlit until I hit the edge of the forest. Bleeding, dazed but free. I stopped at the edge of the trees. In the distance, sirens were getting louder. Dozens of cars. Headlights blinking. Residents had called the real police, and they were coming. I reached into my boot and pulled out the backup drive. Still intact. Then I heard a soft knock behind me. I turned. Emily was standing there. In her hand, Mac's safe and wagging. But before we could say a word, a gun clicked behind her head. Karen. I told you, Jason. No one escapes the tunnel. Karen stood behind Emily, one hand gripping her by the shoulder, the other holding a silver pistol aimed at her head. Max whimpered softly beside them. Put the drive down, Jason, Karen hissed. Or I make her disappear. I froze. My mind raced. Behind me were the flashing lights of incoming sheriff's cars. In front of me, Karen, calm as ever, ready to erase another witness. But then, a boom shook the ground beneath our feet. The tunnel under Harmony Valley had just started to collapse. The cabal's secret empire was crumbling. And it wasn't by accident. 2 hours earlier, after fleeing the bunker and escaping through the woods, I had only one goal: get the drive to the authorities. But I also had another plan. Emily and I knew from her father's old notes that the tunnel system was unstable. The entire structure was decades old, patched together and reinforced by amateurs. And there was one more piece of information in those blueprints: a detonation switch, buried under the fountain. The original shutdown failsafe. We split up. Emily circled around to find Max, and I went back underground one last time, through a storm drain that connected behind Rick's backyard shed. I crawled into the dark, holding the backup drive in one hand and a crowbar in the other. I followed the map Emily drew step by step, breath by breath, until I found it. A red metal box. Rusted. Covered in dust. I pried it open. Inside was a single dial and a lever labeled "Emergency Closure. Do not pull without authority." Well, I had my own kind of authority now. I pulled it. And now, back to the present. The ground shook again. Karen looked around, panic flashing across her eyes for the first time. "You didn't?" she whispered. "Oh, I did," I said, stepping forward. "It's over, Karen." But she wasn't done. She pulled Emily tighter, dragged her backward toward the tunnel entrance, her escape plan crumbling with every quake. "You think this will stop us?" she spat. "You think a few files and an old janitor's loyalty will undo decades of control?" She raised the gun. Bang. A single shot rang out. Karen dropped to her knees. Behind her was Mr. Howard, holding an old revolver. "She was my granddaughter, you witch," he growled. And I never forgot. The police arrived seconds later. Dozens of them. Sheriffs, state police, and even a few federal agents, tipped off by a mass upload from Emily's emergency transmission system. The files had gone viral. The entire town had seen them. Some shared them. Others marched into the HOA office demanding answers. Karen was arrested on the spot. Rick was found hiding in the back of his luxury RV, crying. Deborah? She tried to shred documents before the cops arrived. But Mr. Howard locked the doors from the outside. Justice was swift. And messy. The tunnels were sealed permanently. City engineers declared the entire foundation of Harmony Valley unstable. Properties dropped in value overnight. Lawsuits began pouring in. Families demanded restitution. Some moved away. But not me. Or Emily. We stayed. The community needed rebuilding, not just of homes but of trust. The old HOA was dismantled. A new committee was formed, this time by public vote. And cameras were removed. Privacy laws were rewritten. I was elected president. First rule I passed? No more secrets. Ever. Emily and I stood by the old birdbath one last time. Max barked happily, chasing butterflies. "I can't believe it's over," she said. I nodded. "Almost." She raised an eyebrow. "Almost?" I pulled out one last file, Karen's original manifesto. The one outlining how she had groomed new members. Recruited them from other neighborhoods. She wasn't just running Harmony Valley, I said. She was connected to a network. Emily stared at it, then back at me. "Then we go after the rest?" I smiled. "You with me?" She took my hand. "Always." From a tunnel of silence to a town of truth, Harmony Valley was never the same again. But it took fire, betrayal, and a brave little golden retriever to get us there. And me? I now wake up knowing the ground beneath me is solid. Because I tore apart what was rotten, and helped build something real. Would you have pulled the lever if you were in my shoes? Let me know where you're watching from, and always remember, sometimes it takes one voice to bring the whole tunnel down. Like, comment, subscribe for more jaw-dropping true stories.